Dean Butler, quiet, respectful, and loyal to the legacy of Little House on the Prairie, has always been careful about what he shares. He never wanted to stir controversy. He never wanted to speak out of turn. But after all these years, he's finally revealing something that's left fans shaken. What Melissa Gilbert went through on that set was far more complicated than anyone realized. She was just a teenager, barely 16, thrust into storylines that demanded she act like a grown woman, married on screen, kissing a man nearly a decade older, performing scenes that looked like romance but felt like pressure. And Dean saw it all, quietly, carefully, and painfully. He didn't say anything back then. None of them did. But now, decades later, he's finally telling the truth about what she endured. And what he saw wasn't right. When Dean Butler first stepped onto the set of Little House on the Prairie, he was stepping into something sacred. The show wasn't just a television series by that point. It was a phenomenon. Families across America had already fallen in love with Charles and Caroline, with Mary, and of course with little Laura Ingalls. The idea of Laura growing up, falling in love, and getting married wasn't just a plotline, it was an event. And Dean Butler was at the center of it. He was in his early 20s when he was cast as Almanzo Wilder, Laura's future husband. It was a pivotal role. Fans had waited 6 seasons to see Laura become a woman, and now she was going to find love. On screen, it looked magical, but behind the scenes, it was far more complicated. Melissa Gilbert was just 15 when their romance began filming. She'd been on the show since she was 9 years old. The audience had watched her grow up in real time. But now, as scripts called for Laura to fall in love, kiss, get married, and play out a young adult relationship, the truth was hard to ignore. Melissa wasn't ready. Not emotionally, not physically, not personally. She was still a girl. Dean Butler has since admitted that joining the show at that moment was deeply uncomfortable. He wasn't just playing a love interest. He was expected to help sell a romance to millions of viewers, opposite a teenager. He said that he constantly had to remind himself that Melissa was just a kid, that it was a performance, that it wasn't real. But for Melissa, it was real, or at least the pressure was. She didn't have a normal adolescence. There were no awkward first crushes, no quiet heartbreaks behind the bleachers, no slow steps into adulthood. Instead, she was surrounded by cameras, direction, and expectations. She was told how to love, how to kiss, how to grow up, and it all happened in front of the world. Dean Butler has never criticized Melissa. In fact, he's always spoken with kindness and care when her name comes up. But it's in what he said around the edges, in the pauses, in the reflections, that fans are finally starting to understand what he saw and what he now regrets. Because what viewers remember as a sweet romance was actually a young girl trying to survive adult expectations. And Dean? He may have looked like her husband on screen, but off-screen, he was watching something unfold that no one knew how to talk about back then. And now he's finally talking. Before Little House on the Prairie, Melissa Gilbert was just another Hollywood child, bright-eyed, hopeful, full of energy. But once she was cast as Laura Ingalls, everything changed. Her life didn't just revolve around the show, it became the show. There was no off time, no balance, no normal childhood. Melissa has spoken in later years about what it meant to grow up in front of a camera. She didn't go to a traditional school. She didn't have slumber parties or weekend trips with friends. She had call sheets, makeup chairs, lines to memorize, and long, exhausting filming days. From the age of 9, she wasn't just working. She was carrying the show's emotional weight. She was the heart of the story, and that came with expectations no child should be asked to shoulder. By the time Melissa turned 15, those expectations had only grown heavier. Audiences wanted to see Laura grow up, fall in love, get married, have a family. But behind the braids and prairie dresses, Melissa was still trying to figure out who she was. In her memoir, Prairie Tale, she wrote, "There was no real Melissa, just Laura." That one sentence says it all. She didn't know where her character ended and she began. She was being asked to perform adult emotions, love, loss, commitment before she even understood them. and she had to do it with a smile. Always composed, always professional. There was no room for awkward teenage years. No space to fall apart. Dean Butler, looking back, has said that Melissa was remarkably composed for someone so young. He saw how well she handled the pressure. But he also saw something else, something that's only clear in hindsight. She wasn't growing up. She was being grown, pushed, shaped, directed into someone else's version of maturity. Melissa has shared how strange it felt to have to film romantic scenes with someone older, someone she admired, but barely knew. She remembers being nervous, embarrassed, even ashamed at times. And yet, she had to pretend she was in love, that she understood marriage, that she was ready for that kind of story. And because she was so good at it, so believable, the audience never questioned it. But Dean did. He was there for the awkward silences, the nervous laughter, the moments where Melissa would look around and seem suddenly small. He said he tried to be patient, gentle, respectful. And by all accounts, he was. But it didn't stop the machine from rolling forward. Melissa Gilbert didn't get to be a child. Not really. She got to be Laura Ingalls. And for a while, that was enough. But now, decades later, even Dean admits what she was asked to carry was far too much. When Dean Butler first walked onto the Little House set, he wasn't just stepping into a role, he was stepping into a family. But not in the warm, comforting way viewers might imagine. The cast had been together for years. Bonds had formed. Dynamics were set. And Dean, the newcomer, was expected to blend in immediately. Not just as a co-star, but as Laura Ingalls' future husband. He's since described it as an intimidating experience. Landon was in charge. Not just as an actor, but as producer, writer, and director. It was his show, and every member of the cast, child or adult, was expected to rise to his standard. And that meant professionalism, obedience, and emotional maturity. Even for a teenager like Melissa, Dean didn't come to disrupt. He came to do his job. But it didn't take long for him to notice that something felt off. Melissa was talented, no question. But she was young. Too young for the weight she was expected to carry. And behind the camera, Dean could see that she wasn't just playing a role. She was enduring one. There were moments, he's recalled, when she'd freeze before a romantic scene. When she'd shift her body language just enough to reveal her discomfort. When she'd smile, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. These weren't moments of poor acting. They were moments of a real teenage girl trying to process adult expectations in real time. Dean has never criticized the production directly. He's always been respectful of Landon's legacy and the show's success. But in more recent interviews, there's been a change in his tone. A softness. A sadness. A sense that, looking back now, he sees things he didn't fully grasp at the time. He said that Melissa was remarkably strong, that she carried herself with grace and composure beyond her years. But he also acknowledges that being asked to portray a romantic relationship, to get married on screen, to represent an idealized version of adulthood, while still trying to figure out who she was as a person, wasn't something she should have had to do alone. And she wasn't alone. But in many ways, she was unsupported. Dean was her scene partner, her fictional husband, her co-star. But he was also aware that he was an adult acting opposite a child. He's admitted that this dynamic made him cautious, even uncomfortable at times. He did his best to keep a respectful distance, to maintain professionalism. But the truth was always there under the surface. Melissa was being asked to grow up too fast, and everyone was watching. What makes Dean's reflections so powerful now is that they aren't angry. They aren't blaming anyone. They're simply honest. And they're full of the kind of quiet regret that only comes with time. He didn't know how to name it then, but now he sees it clearly, and so do the fans. In the years since Little House on the Prairie ended, both Melissa Gilbert and Dean Butler have spoken about their time on the show, but in very different ways. Melissa has been more open. In her memoir, Prairie Tale, and in interviews, she's shared stories of awkwardness, emotional pressure, and confusion. Especially during the later seasons when Laura transitions into womanhood. She's described filming romantic scenes as strange and even mortifying at times. Not because of Dean, but because she was still figuring out how to be a young woman. while having to perform adulthood in front of millions of viewers. There's one passage where she recalls her first kiss with Dean on screen. She wrote that she was anxious, embarrassed, and aware that the audience saw Laura as mature, but she still felt very much like a child. She was told to act confident, to play a wife, but behind the scenes, she was deeply unsure of herself, and no one asked if she was okay. Dean, by contrast, has always been more reserved in public. He's careful with his words, never dramatic, never critical. For years, he deflected questions about the pressure Melissa faced, choosing instead to focus on the craft and the legacy of the show. But in recent interviews and fan events, something has shifted. He's begun to acknowledge the emotional complexity of the role he played, not just as Almanzo, but as a young man opposite a teenage girl being asked to navigate scenes far beyond her years. He's reflected on how awkward it was, how he tried to stay respectful, how the responsibility weighed on him even back then, though he didn't fully understand why. One of the most telling moments came when a fan asked Dean how it felt to film the wedding scenes with Melissa. He paused, and then, with quiet seriousness, said, "I was very aware of how young she was. I did my best to be careful. I was there to support her." That one sentence said more than he realized, because by simply acknowledging what Melissa went through without spinning it, without minimizing it, he did something that hadn't been done before. He named it. He didn't use dramatic language. He didn't accuse anyone, but he made it clear. She was a child being asked to act like an adult. And no one really talked about that at the time. They still don't. Even now, there are things both Melissa and Dean haven't fully said. Whether out of privacy, professionalism, or a desire to protect the show's legacy, they continue to walk a careful line. But for fans paying attention, the message is loud and clear. Something wasn't right, and they both lived through it. For decades, Little House on the Prairie has been remembered as a wholesome family show. It's been praised for its values, its warmth, and the timeless stories of love, hardship, and perseverance. And for many fans, especially those who grew up watching it, the show feels almost sacred, an untouched memory of simpler times. But memories are complicated, and sometimes what we felt as viewers isn't the full story. Melissa Gilbert's experience is only now being truly understood, not just because she's shared her own words, but because people like Dean Butler have begun to speak up, not with scandal or blame, but with quiet honesty. And that honesty is powerful, because when Dean admits that Melissa was still just a girl, when he says he was aware of how much pressure she was under, when he reflects on those scenes and finally lets go of the decades-long silence, it makes something click for fans, something that was always there, but hidden beneath the glow of nostalgia. Melissa wasn't just acting, she was surviving, and the audience never knew. Dean's voice matters in this moment not because he's trying to make it about himself, but because he was there. He saw what no one else saw. He noticed the discomfort, the confusion, the growing weight Melissa was asked to carry. And now, as an older man looking back, he's doing what so few people do in Hollywood. He's telling the truth, gently, respectfully, but truthfully. And in doing so, he's honoring Melissa, not exposing her. He's saying what so many fans feel when they revisit those old episodes. That something about it just doesn't sit right anymore. That maybe we didn't see it then, but we see it now. And that recognition matters. Because Little House on the Prairie will always be a part of people's lives. But so will the people who made it. The real people. The children who had to grow up too fast. The actors who were pushed into roles that didn't fit. The silence that surrounded them. Dean Butler's reflections aren't just about Melissa. They're about every child star who was told to be perfect. Every young girl who was asked to smile when she didn't understand why. Every viewer who watched the romance, not knowing how much it cost the people involved. Now we know. And once you know, you can't forget it. They looked like the perfect couple. Laura and Almanzo. Sweet, gentle, meant to be. But behind the quiet prairie romance was something far more complex. Melissa Gilbert was still a girl, navigating fame, pressure, and expectation before she even knew who she was. Dean Butler was a young man, brought in to play a role that required sensitivity, maturity, and restraint. And together, they filmed scenes that millions of viewers would come to cherish, even as they both struggled with what those scenes really meant behind the camera. Dean never spoke about it. Not for years. Maybe he didn't have the words back then. Maybe he didn't fully understand what he was witnessing. But now he does. And now he's finally speaking, not to take anything away from the show, but to shine a light on what it cost. Especially for Melissa, because what she went through wasn't fair. It wasn't easy. And no child should have to carry that kind of emotional weight just to make a story work. Dean Butler has never been the loudest voice from Little House. But in this moment, his voice matters the most. For more emotional stories, check out this video.